Hi, everyone. Thank you all so much for hopping on here today for this expert session, Education for Social Change. My name is Emily Gooding. I'm with the Indie Author Project, and I'm joined here today with award-winning author and educator, Dr. Tyner. And to start, before I pass it on over to Dr. Tyner, just a couple of quick kind of housekeeping items to note. Everyone is currently muted, all attendees. That just tends to help with the audio quality on these group webinars. But if you please direct any questions or comments to the questions box on your GoToWebinar control panel. Also, on that GoToWebinar control panel, you'll find a few handouts available for you to download. Additionally, this webinar is being recorded, and after we finish up here today, all registrants will receive a link to the on-demand version of that recording to view kind of at your leisure. Additionally, once Dr. Tyner finishes up with her presentation, we'll have a little Q&A session at the end. So once again, please feel free to share any questions or comments you may have there in that questions box. But otherwise, now that we've kind of gotten that out of the way, we can go ahead and get started. I'll pass it on over to Dr. Tyner here in just a moment, and here we are. Dr. Tyner, you can take it away.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here with you today. So as you have questions, please, as Emily said, make sure that you put them in the chat box because I want this to be interactive and provide you with key tools to help advance education for social change. So as an overview of what we'll discuss today, there are a few items. So we'll look at, on the next slide, the history of Miss Freedom Fighter Esquire, the inspiration, basically on how I decided to use my superpowers to make a difference in the world. And more importantly, I'll talk about how I've been able to use this book because I believe books are a tool to educate and inspire, not just for children, but really what I've seen that has emerged with our book, Justice Makes a Difference, and our other books, Amazing Africa, Kofi Loves Music, a whole series of books. What has emerged is an opportunity to also engage teachers, parents, and community members. So I'll talk about how I've combined my research as a scholar and a professor with also the children's books as a tool for engagement and the learning curriculum that supports that process. And then I'll talk about how the next section on profiles of superheroes for justice, how I've also used it as a significant educational tool around the civil rights and human rights movements across the world. And last but not least, as many of us think about the future and our core professional competencies around diversity, equity, and inclusion, I'll share just a few ideas on how we can once again use books to create change. So next we'll look at what inspired me. How did I become Miss Freedom Fighter Esquire? Where did this all begin? And I'll encourage you, you'll receive a few additional resources, but it starts with the idea of who is Miss Freedom Fighter Esquire. So as you'll see on the next slide, it gives you an image of being Wonder Woman with a law degree and an afro. So where did that image come from? For me, I always wanted to be a superhero for justice. I was determined from a very young age to use my voice for justice, to stand up for the rights for others. So initially, why the topic is education and why I became an educator was to be able to serve and lead in my community. So when we think about this specifically, I would ask you, as an author, what's your personal mission? What inspires you? And what do you hope to achieve as a result of your books? And when I say that, when someone picks up your book, what do you expect them to learn? What do you want them to take away? So for me, with my book of Justice Makes a Difference, I want folks to have a deeper understanding that you're never too young, you're never too old to make a difference, and that everyone can be impactful in some real, meaningful ways. So let's embark on the journey. And so the journey is the first question of why, the case for justice. And I know many times we can see the research, we can see information, but really the why is in the case for justice. I'm just going to give you a few statistics, and this is what helped to inspire me to do my work and not just writing Justice Makes a Difference, but also looking to create key educational tools. So the first one, and the reason why I call it a case for justice, is a little backdrop. I'm an attorney. This will be my 15th year serving as a law professor. I teach civil rights law. So as I think about the case, I literally had to think for myself, if I'm going to spend additional time in writing and researching and trying to figure out K through 12 education and build some bridges in some meaningful ways, I needed to understand what I was seeking to accomplish. So the attorney in me said, anytime you're seeking to do something, you build a case. So in building a case, I first looked at literacy. Now we know the data, and it's listed here, about children in particular. 1 in 4 children have not learned how to read. And if you're not reading at the fourth grade level, and by 4th grade, you're 4 times more likely to drop out of school. We've seen some of this data. But here's the connection where it comes back to me personally as a civil rights attorney. We also now have data that shows a correlation between what? Literacy and future incarceration. So it was a shame and heart-wrenching to see that many of my clients learned how to read when they were in prison. So a part of what I teach my students, instead of just identifying a problem and saying, oh, that's a shame, because you have to think to yourself, how could someone protect their legal rights if they didn't know how to read? I think that's a constitutional challenge. But really the idea then becomes, when you see a problem, how do you create a solution? So a part of why I decided to write Justice Makes a Difference was dedicating it to my clients to help support early reading. Next up is cultural awareness, and I'll talk about this more as well throughout the presentation. But we know that diversity, equity, and inclusion matters. We know that we have a changing demographic in America that's not happening. When I first started doing diversity inclusion work, we'd say, oh, it's in 2060 that America will no longer have an ethnic majority. And then we said, oh, it's by 2050. The most recent studies show that it will be by 2043. And in fact, I think by the time we receive our census, which is, here's a little reminder, please complete your census and be counted. By the time we receive our census results from 2020, I would project that in many ways, the cultural landscape has already shifted more dramatically than we could have anticipated. So how does that work? I'm not just simply saying that we need books that are mirrors for diverse children. Of course, I think that's important, because if I think about myself, I only had one diverse book growing up, was related to when Jessica joined Babysitters Club. But imagine if I had Justice Makes a Difference when I was younger. What type of inspiration would I have had? So when we think about this, yes, they are mirrors, but they're also windows. I was just talking to a group yesterday. It's of critical importance to ensure if we're training the next generation of leaders in our classrooms, what do they need to know? And my research, so I write children's books and I write legal textbooks as well. My current research, I'm focusing on diversity, equity, and inclusion as a core competency of learning for everyone. So that's that Windows image. But last but not least, I think it's of critical importance to also think about young people, our youth leading us. All around the world, we have countless examples. I just have one here of contemporary terms of looking at the dream defenders and also looking at the freedom riders of our past. Those, the SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Commission or Committee. Think about the young Congressman John Lewis, who sat at lunch counters to desegregate public spaces. So we know that young people have had the moral courage and the strength to help change and advance social justice. So the case then was built. I knew that there was something that I needed to do. So that's what led to the creation of the book that we know today as Justice Makes a Difference. So let's look at the next slide. I alluded to it, but it'll give you a diagram that I hope that you will share with others. It's called Diversity in Children's Books. So this is from 2018. And as you can see, I talked about my own experience from K through 12 of not having books that reflected me or a young girl of color, that only about 10% of books then are written by authors of color or have a main character of color in the books, specifically as we look at African Americans. So when we think about this, it's a unique opportunity to make sure, and you only have it as 1% for Indigenous or American Indians, 5% for Latinx, 7% for Asian Pacific, but yet we have 27% of books that we write about animals and 50% that represent Caucasians. So then the question becomes, if we are in this beautiful, rich tapestry that the late Dr. Maya Angelou described as something unique to who we are as America, and honoring, she talked about each thread within the tapestry, let's make sure that we don't miss opportunities to have diversity in books. So what do you do with all of this? Seems like a lot of information. You're talking about leadership, you're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. What my hope is for you as an author, for you as someone who's passionate about social change, that you'll take a moment to think about how you can be a contributor. Are there ways that you can promote diversity, equity, and inclusion through your written work, through your illustrations, through even the possibility of the curriculum that you create around your books as well? So throughout the rest of the presentation, I'm going to take you inside my own journey of going from producing multiple books and to then thinking about, yes, we created a book for a purpose, to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion, to promote youth leadership development, and with the ultimate goal for social change. But those sound like large, laudable goals. How do you do this? So the next portion of my presentation will give you a bridge on how you go from all these aspirational goals to how do you make them come alive. So what does it mean? It means it's a challenge for each and every one of us to be a child champion or a superhero for justice. So it's really then about this word that we call leadership. And I'll pause here to give you a brief little piece of homework. This idea of what it means to be a child champion actually is not from me. It's from Dr. Pearson. You can watch her TED Talk because she talks about how every child deserves a champion. And if you need some morning inspiration, I think it's one of the best TED Talks that you can find. So I encourage you to tune in to get a sense of why we can use books and education to inspire and how to do this. So when I go into a classroom, it's not just about reading the justice book. It's about inspiring young people to be leaders. So I ask the question of, how do you define leadership? And sometimes I also ask the second question, what does it mean to be a superhero? And I remember I didn't think that the young people, I was at a daycare center, and I asked them both of these questions. I thought, that may not be at the age level. Was I pleasantly surprised? Every one of them had an answer for both of those questions. So kudos to their parents and educators and caring adults in their lives, because you got a resounding answer of being a superhero, being a leader was about helping people and helping people in their community. So I ask this question, and oftentimes I just open it up with asking a simple one-word response. So the next slide gives you a sense of what some of those responses tend to be. Now, the first one is related to vision. And this one is from Oprah Winfrey. She says, whatever our dreams, ideas, or projects, we plant a seed, nurture it, and reap the fruits of our labor. So you get a sense of, how can you help young people do that thing that Einstein talked about that's essential? How can you get them to unleash that power of imagination? So even as an activity, I sometimes have young people draw what are some of the things that they could imagine to do to serve in their community, whether it's serving in a kitchen or helping to get books for the free little book library in their community. All those ways, and remember I said earlier, young people, that they're never too young to make a difference. Also, this idea of social justice, of looking at the impact of our words and our actions. So I rely on Ida B. Wells for this piece, and she said the way to right wrongs is to turn the light of truth upon them. So it's an opportunity, as I bring up these quotes as well, to introduce other leaders and inspiration to our young people as well. And last but not least, I mentioned her before, so you can tell I'm deeply inspired by her work, is Dr. Maya Angelou. And her advice around service is simple, but yet profound. If you get, give. If you learn, teach. So that gives a little inspiration, not just for teachers, but also for young people, because oftentimes when I ask young folks and our children and students, how can they make a difference? They're thinking to themselves, remember, they feel like I'm too young to make a difference. But in the book, Justice Makes a Difference, I give them an example of an 8-year-old girl who chooses to make a difference in the lives of folks in her community in meaningful ways. So this is just one activity that you can use based upon your book, what's an opening question that you can bring up? Because it's important as an educator, you always want to have that applied learning. So how can you connect the concepts to what students can learn about social change? So this is just one quick tool. Next, based upon my research and being a leadership scholar, I focus a lot on this question of what skills do you need to serve as a superhero for justice? But really this question is, what are the core leadership skills? And I oftentimes turn this into an interactive piece as well. That way people can tell me, what does it take to be an effective leader? So on the next slide, you have just some initial ideas to think about. What does it take? So based upon the leadership research, we know a few things. We first of all know that your leadership style, and this is what I love to share in my books and through my characters, is as unique as your DNA, meaning that we each have a unique set of gifts and talents and strengths that we can use to make a difference. So that's why each of my characters, they have unique attributes. Some love to write, some love to sing, some love to play music, because I'm seeking to inspire young people to be this advice that my mother gave me when I was young. She said, be the best original, be yourself. So naturally, if you think about my work as an author, it was being the best original, being myself in writing children's books, because I love to read, I love to teach. So it came natural to think about ways to engage young people. So as you see here on the diagram, and I'll just quickly go over this piece, because I want you to think about what are some of the tools, what are some of the outcomes or learning objectives that connect with your books. So for me, I try to teach these components of leadership. Now, of course, these are big words for young people without a context, but I try to give examples on how to do these things to develop your leadership skills. So actually, I'll take young Justice around the wheel here. So in the book, she learns the importance of having a vision. She hopes to create a neighborhood community garden. So she has an opportunity to have a vision for creating a space where people come together, and a vision of gardening to help provide what? A service and help to minister to a need in the community related to food insecurity. So she is able to create a strategic plan. She engages with her grandmother to say, how do we get our neighbors together to start this garden? And it takes critical thinking skills, because then she has to decide what will be in the garden, who will we bring together, how will we make this happen? And most importantly, it's about influence and modeling the way, those last two at the bottom, that she's able to inspire other young people to think about that we have strength in numbers. It's great to have one person, but when many hands come together, that we can be impactful and make a difference in some meaningful ways. So they're not only transforming a small part of their community, but as they expand out, they're touching the lives of others in their neighborhood and collectively bringing forth change. Doesn't that sound like social change movements? Yes. So you see Justice going through this process with her other peers and learning the importance of leadership. So when we think about this, and the next slide, you get a sense of what is leadership. So it's tempting for many people to believe what some of the stereotypes can be about leadership. That oftentimes that children are too young to make a difference, that we're just pouring into children and we see, as they learn, then they can retain the information. But really what we're looking to do is to inspire and to cultivate their talents. That way they have the tools to make a difference about the issues that they're passionate about. And then we oftentimes say that children do not have the experience needed. Oh, I learned a lesson about this just a few days ago, because I was trying to work on a tool around a broader project and needed some help with technology. And wasn't it beautiful that my own 7th grader and my family was able to support with the technology and give me some new tools to even accomplish a project that I was working on. And this piece oftentimes is not just about children, it also impacts adults as well. We're worried about whether or not someone has a title or a position. But what we'll see in the redefining leadership, that it's about none of these things at all. In fact, the leadership, once we redefine it, it's a sense of a leader being a planter of ideas, seeds of change, and a vision for justice. It's about that collective action that I talked about when I used that justice example. It's about how justice came together in her community, how she inspired others, and how she looked for opportunities to make a difference wherever she was. And that she was not concerned about what she could do alone, but what she could do collectively with others in making change. So it oftentimes becomes this big debate in the sense of a leadership debate of, are leaders born or are they made? And so when we look at that question, I can just briefly tell you, based upon the research, we now know that yes, we are born with unique characteristics. Like for instance, folks go, well, how are you able to talk in front of audiences of tens of thousands of people and be comfortable and enjoy yourself? Because my mother would say I was talking since I was born. I don't know if she means that as an insult or a compliment, but really I think it's the latter. That really being that's one of my strengths, that I love to communicate and share information. So what did that mean very naturally? That my mother saw very early on the seeds of me becoming an educator, because it wasn't just about a love of talking. What she really found was that I had a love of teaching. So some of the characteristics, yes, you were born with, but I credit my mother because of this piece of being made. So she helped define experiences for me to do what? To continue to build my skills. So just, I was talking to her about some of the inspiration on my journey from being a Girl Scout. So you're learning some of the critical thinking skills, to being in debate clubs, all these different pieces. And it gives us this clear sense that leadership is a journey often mistaken for a destination, that we all have an opportunity to learn, and what great ways we can contribute as authors by providing those tools that young people can find those gifts, those treasures. Because I always tell educators, authors, anyone working with children, that you're a treasure hunter. How do you unveil the treasure in young people to help them to then bring their full potential to the world? So my mantra is limitless potential. So when you're thinking about this, the next slide gives us a sense of, what does it take to be that leader? What does it take to educate our young people about social change? What skills do we need to teach? And this is actually a little personal story. This of the illustrations here that you can see, this is actually my late grandmother, Nellie Lightfoot, and myself, yours truly. So the illustrator used my Citizen of the Week photos from first grade, along with photos of my grandmother, to create the Justice character and the grandma character. Why did I do that? Because of course I dedicated the book to my foremothers who went ahead of me, but more importantly, it was an opportunity to connect as I thought about education and the tools that I wanted to provide in the book, to get a sense of who inspired me to be a leader. And that was my grandmother. So here are some of the lessons. You know, you can talk about being a team player, being a good listener, your ability to serve. All those components were things that my grandmother taught me. So through the book, I'm able to share those leadership lessons. So what does it mean to be a champion for justice? Instead of just saying it, one of the things that I've been able to do through the books is to show them. And when I say show them, many of the unsung heroes of American history and world history, women that we may have never heard their names, people of color that we may have never heard or learned anything about them. Remember I talked about those mirrors and windows? So here's an opportunity to learn about a few folks who inspired me, that also inspired justice in the book. So champions for justice, let's jump in. The first one that I'll talk about is Ida B. Wells. And you'll see a lot about Ida B. Wells now, because not only was she a supporter of equal rights as it related to racial justice, but she also helped to support women's rights as it related to voting. So we know her as a profound journalist. We also know her as the author of The Red Record. And if you're not familiar, and you can order a copy online, it's related to the history of lynching in America. So it's an important historical text to give you a sense of what was happening during the peak of Jim Crow and before, during the Reconstruction period. So highly recommend taking a look at her book, The Red Record. And she also was the editor of the Memphis Free Speech and Headlight. But why do I highlight Ida B. Wells? Because remember I said we're all treasure hunters as we're working with young people? Because she provides an important lesson or inspiration for that young person that loves to write, that young person who loves to investigate critical stories, who loves to learn. Then she learned about Ida B. Wells, someone who was able to use her pen to write for justice. Next up, we have Paul Robeson. Now, what I know about Paul Robeson is a bit of a personal story in the sense of I was in my library, so I was taking my weekly tour to see what were the new releases and to pick up some new books. And I remember looking at the cover of a book, and there was this man that stood larger than life. And I thought to myself, who is he? I'd never seen him before, never heard his name. So you know what I did right away? I checked out the book. And what I found was, not only was he a lawyer, a great athlete, he played football, a beautiful baritone voice, soothing but yet strong, a profound actor. He was all of those things. But he also was that word that I am trying to teach young people about. He was a leader, fighting for the rights of others. So we have here a quote for him that the answer to injustice is not to silence the critic, but to end the injustice. So I felt a great honor of bringing Paul Robeson into my book as one of the sources of inspiration for young people, that he was determined to use his voice through singing, through acting, to help to create a better world. And I also love to use this as an example, especially when I'm helping to train and inspire educators as well, is about the power of mentorship. Because although most people don't know his name per se, they may know his mentee. Any guesses of who his mentee was? He sung that great song, Deo, Deo, daylight coming and you want to go home. Ah, Harry Belafonte. And why is it important of that connection between mentorship and mentor and mentee? It's of critical importance because then it gives us a challenge for each and every one of us to think about how do we share what we've learned with other people? How do we help them go further, faster? So he gave Harry Belafonte an important mission statement. He said, get people to sing your song and they will want to do what? Hear your story. So through singing his song, both Harry and Paul did something amazing. They helped the world to understand and get a clearer sense of what justice for everyone should look like, no matter the color of your skin or where you came from. So in fact, you can look at Mr. Belafonte's film. You can check it out at your local library. It's called Sing Your Song. Powerful piece. Highly encourage you to take a look. Next up, we have another favorite. So see, I get a chance to tell you about all these great folks. And actually, I'll pause as we're going on to the next slide. I will show you a little bit, a glimpse into the book, to show you how we were able to tell those stories through the book. So you get a sense of, and I'll show you Paul Robeson since I just talked about him. So we use the story then as authors to connect to the lesson. So I'll just read this piece because I think you may enjoy getting a sense of some of the lessons that young Justice learned from Paul Robeson. So Justice wrote all about Paul Robeson, who sang freedom songs in more than 20 different languages. He was a lawyer, a singer, an actor, and a professional athlete. Justice marveled at how talented Paul Robeson was. He was able to touch people's hearts through the power of song. These songs empowered others to join in the fight for freedom and justice. Justice had grown up hearing her grandma sing powerful songs like We Shall Overcome and Sam Cooke's A Change Is Gonna Come. These were freedom songs. When grandma sang, Justice could feel it all the way down in her toes. Grandma Justice said, I'm gonna sing for justice. Will you teach me some songs? And grandma began to sing, This Little Light of Mine, I'm gonna let it shine. And Justice felt a light inside her spark. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, she sang. So you can see then how through the storytelling time and when I go to visit schools, I have an opportunity to share all the lessons that we've just been describing about leadership, about making a difference through the words of an 8-year-old girl named Justice. So now you get a sense of how to connect the work that you're doing to key learning tools and outcomes. Next up, I love to also bring up Dr. Wangari Maathai. She is an inspiration for me as I think about environmental justice and building strong and safe communities. When we think about it through the lens of climate change, and when we think about it through the lens of health and wellness. And if you don't know her, I encourage you to take a look at her website. Her daughter is currently overseeing their foundation, and it has plenty of resources. It's called the Green Belt Movement. So why do I love teaching young people about Dr. Wangari Maathai? First of all, it's an important lesson. It shows that one person can make a difference. The Green Belt Movement started with Dr. Wangari Maathai planting one tree, encouraging another grandmother to plant another tree, another aunt, another sister. You can see the numbers grow. Before you know it, to date, the Green Belt Movement has led to the planting of over 51 million trees. Why is this important? Because then I can teach young people an important lesson. It doesn't matter where you start, it matters where you finish. And starting with others, I guarantee you have opportunities to finish in a way that takes the work beyond your imagination. So one tree to 51 million. And I love this quote. So I also have in the design of the book, I also have quotes to inspire. You can see they're in the hardcover here. And what I love about the quotes then is that you can also, once again, we're talking about learning, additional learning tools. So you have this one here. Until you dig a hole, you plant a tree, you water it, and you make it survive, you haven't done a thing. You're just talking. So I use this quote to give young people inspiration to say, get started, start wherever you are, take action. And the second reason, so I said inspiration was the first reason why I love the work of Dr. Wangari Maathai and introducing it to children. The second reason why I introduced Dr. Wangari Maathai to children is to also introduce children to the continent of Africa, because it's been alarming to see of how many young people and adults believe that Africa is one country. And in fact, what I love to introduce then with talking about the Green Belt Movement and Dr. Wangari's work is to introduce folks to, first of all, that Africa is a continent, second, that she's from Kenya, that is a country, and then I help to teach them a little bit about geography. So it's north, south, west, east, and then we know and learn that Kenya is in East Africa. So next we have inspiration from Shirley Chisholm. And most young people that I talk to, and even adults, have never heard of Shirley Chisholm. But what do we know about her? Oh, her mantra was very strong. She said she was unbought and unbossed. So in 1972, she dared to do something absolutely amazing, to run for the nation's highest office. Shirley Chisholm ran for President of the United States. So we know her as being a bold politician. We know her as being someone who was strong, and we know her as being someone who was dedicated to what? The theme that we're talking about, social change and equal rights for everyone. And this quote I love to encourage young people with this quote. Don't listen to those who say you can't. Listen to the voice inside that says, I can. So I'd love to give these quotes as inspiration to give young people daily affirmations that they can reach their dreams and they can make a difference. Last but not least, I have Charles Hamilton Houston that's featured and profiled prominently in the book. And I love to talk about Charles Hamilton Houston is because of the reason is oftentimes, once again, no one tends to know his name at all, but we sure tend to know the name of his mentee. So we then get a chance to know who's his mentee. Countless attorneys who emerged from Howard Law School and who worked with him with the NAACP Defense Fund. But truly, one of the mentors that we all know through American history is Justice Thurgood Marshall. So by talking about Charles Hamilton Houston, it gives me a chance to connect with young people. They often learn about the case of Brown versus Board of Education in class. But here's an opportunity to learn about a man who worked decades to help lay the foundation and to bring forth the case that we know as Brown versus Board of Education. So his quote is related to a sense of what young people can be. So young people, he encourages them with this word about leadership. He says it's about being a mouthpiece for the weak and a sentinel guarding against wrong. So he's reminding young people to speak up and speak out. When we see injustices, the late Congressman John Lewis talked about, getting into that good trouble. So once again, I introduced Charles Hamilton Houston as one of those unsung heroes to remind young people that even if no one ever knows your name, that you can still make an impact and create a legacy for generations to come. So I hope you're feeling inspired by some of these profiles, because I know in visiting countless schools, it's been a great way to inspire young people to make a difference. And one additional person that I want to share with you about, now there's not a full profile of Ella Baker in the book, but I don't think you could write a great children's book that simplifies without including Ella Baker. They called her in Swahili Fundi, as one of the teachers, one of the mentors. And what we need to know about Ella Baker is that she was a chief strategist, that she always had a strategy on how to move forward, on how to create change. She was an organizer, she was an educator, and that word Fundi was critical importance because she was training and inspiring young people to make a difference. And the quote that I have for her is, give people light and people will find the way. Give people light and people will find the way. So how do we shine the light of truth? I know for me as an author, one of the ways that I do that is through my books. So that's the introduction to the people that I describe and talk about and Justice learns about, and Justice Makes a Difference, the story of Miss Freedom Fighter Esquire. The next section I'm going to go through just a few tips for you related to cultural intelligence, related to how you can make and create activities that go along with your books and the learning experience. And then we'll pause for questions, because I want to make sure that I allow ample time to hear from you, to hear about some of the strategies you may be interested in and how I can offer some support or tips. So cultural intelligence, I think this is key. I talked about this earlier, about it being one of the core competencies as a professional, of thinking about if we're training our young people to work, live, and play in a globalized economy, it's important that we help them to be self-aware. And it's not just about being in a globalized economy. The main portion that we all have to think about is how to be a global citizen, a citizen in our neighborhood, a citizen in a nation, and a citizen of the world. So it's being aware, learning new things, picking up new books about new topics, going to cultural fairs. How do you connect? Increasing in knowledge. Of course, that's the power of reading and engagement. Have motivation on this learning journey. Being motivated to learn something new each and every day. So here's a tip for you. I was recently asked in an interview, what's the most critical learning lesson that I give my students? I think it's related to a leadership challenge that I give all of them. I asked them the question of, what are you reading? Notice again, what are you reading? Because that way they can have new tools to learn, grow, and be inspired each and every day. And it's also about a behavioral capability. So we think about this as important as it is to learn the basics of math and arithmetic, as important as it is to learn the basic of phonics. It's also important as a behavior and a learning tool to learn more about diversity, equity, and inclusion topics. So I challenge you, a little more homework for you. As a teacher, I'm always at liberty to give more homework. Use some of these tools that are readily available for you online. One being the Harvard Implicit Association test. You can use that. They'll give you a new lens, new ideas to think about as even an author. How can you combat or address bias in some of the works that you're creating, in some of your communication? How does it work? There are tools available for you, and there will also be a few handouts that you will receive at the conclusion of the presentation as well, that you can think about how do you develop these cultural intelligence tools. So here's a couple activities that I'll give you that I use with young people in the classroom to teach cultural intelligence. The first one being I am statements. So this one is inspired by the work of Michelle Norris, and one of the activities that she created was the race card project. So she asked folks to think about 6 things that describe them. So I describe myself related to my faith, related to where I was born and raised in the community of Rondo. As you can tell, being an educator and loving my work, and being a writer and an author, and also civil rights, my commitment to continuing to work in the civil rights movement. And last but not least, my doctorate and my dissertation focused on this topic. What does leadership mean? And how do we leverage leadership to bring forth social change? So that's an activity that you could work on, especially with young people. It doesn't have to be 6. Maybe it's 1, maybe it's 2, maybe it's 3. Another project that we've worked on, and we've taken this project globally, is related to the question of what's in your hands to make a difference in the world. And you will see 2 young people, and these are college-age students, featured in this particular project. We challenged 10,000 leaders worldwide to join us. We thought of that Green Belt movement example of how it takes just one person to start to bring that ripple effect of making a difference. We thought about Shirley Chisholm, who said, "I can." And we started to ask everyday people, how could they lead change? And notice, they give some very practical examples. I'll lead change by giving others knowledge. And then this piece, inspired by Gandhi, by being the change I want to see. So I also use this activity with young people. If it's not words, they can also draw a picture. And next, you'll see a couple more of the activities that I've used to give you a sense on how to inspire young people, but also how to connect your book to practical activities and learning. So once again, you have the opportunity to engage young people by giving them some things to think about and opportunities to apply what they learn in some tangible ways. So here are a few examples. Challenge them to share some of the lessons that they learned from the presentation. Ask them to think about, even can they tutor other young people? Can they help someone in need? I talked about, and it connects the last point directly to the book. You have a scene in the book where Justice is actually out with her grandmother working in the community kitchen. So serving food in the kitchen. But also, I thought it was important to have these lessons directly in the book. So you see that I also have a reference to what's in your hands to make a difference in the world right here as well. So those are just some examples. And next up, I was pleasantly surprised. I went to a school to do a lecture on this, on how can I teach young people about social change, about civil rights, and about that word justice. And you can see in this photo, it was beyond belief. The principal walked up and said, "We have a special surprise for you." And look at this. They brought up, and this is a learning activity, they used justice, the hands, to tell an important story. As you'll see on the next slide, each of those hands are what? A trace of the hands of the young people that I met during my book tour at their school. And they talked about things, and I'm just going to read a couple here. They said that they can use their hands to feed starving children, to feed the homeless, to help other kids, to help my school. So that way they went beyond just reading a book and hearing from an author, but putting all the hands together to say we are one, and together we can help influence social change. So I conclude with a quote from Diane Nash. And if you're not sure who Diane Nash is, I highly recommend watching the movie Selma. She played a very instrumental role in the film and in real history. And so Diane Nash said, freedom is people realizing they are their own leaders. Freedom is people realizing they are their own leaders. So through my books, through my work as an educator, my hope is that young people can find their voice, find their talents, and do that piece that my mother said, be the best original, be yourself, to be able to lead social change in meaningful ways. So this photo, I'll let you take a closer glimpse. This photo represents just that. You see an interracial, multiracial group coming together. You see males, females, and you see them singing together in one accord. Who were they and what were they doing? They were the freedom riders, that they had come together to, remember I said in the beginning of the presentation that young people have been at the forefront of social change. Here's an example. They came together to desegregate public spaces, starting with buses. They had the courage to take a stand, even if their parents or the generations that came before them did not. They had the courage to say that we are one, that we are going to go forth and help to create a more fair and just society. So they did that one bus, one lunch counter at a time, one protest at a time. So I just think it's really encouragement for young people to know that their voices matter, and that the history, if we look at the history of America, if we look at the history of the world, that young people have been those difference makers. they have been those superheroes and leaders. So I use my books as tools to help engage young people, in particular our students and children, about who they are and the potential that they have to make a difference. So I'm excited now to open the chat up for a few additional questions to get a sense of how I do my work, what's the mission behind my work, and any lessons that you'd like to learn. But thank you for your engagement. Thank you for listening along. I encourage you, we can continue the conversation. You can find me on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram, and I post blogs, other videos around these same topics, helping to train and inspire students to become change agents and difference makers.
Dr. Tyner, thank you so much for all of your insight and your presentation here. I know this is always a very important subject to introduce to younger readers, and of course, very particularly relevant in today. And we've gotten a couple questions coming through from our attendees here, and I know that we're nearing the end of our time, but one kind of topic in particular that seems to be of interest, do you have any advice for maybe burgeoning authors, educators on connecting with local schools, organizations, directly with other educators and young readers in general, but also in particular kind of in this age of COVID and virtual engagement and learning?
Yes, in the age of the global pandemic of COVID, I think a big piece is online. I mean, use Instagram Live, use Facebook Live, Twitter Live as tools, because when the live signal comes on, your audience sees that you're going to do something and make it special and new, make it fun, do book giveaways, connect directly with your audience, because this is the time, although you might not be able to physically get into a school per se, or physically go into a library with a large crowd or a large lecture hall, you still can, through the power of, through my phone, I can reach audiences all around the world. So I took each of my books, I usually do this every Saturday, and I create short videos. So I did a short ABC video on Amazing Africa A to Z. Tens of thousands of people just joined in, listened to the 1 minute, started asking me more questions about why I wrote the book, how did I choose the places to visit. Lo and behold, what I did this week, because I got a lot of folks wanting to know, they've never really seen images of Africa. So one of the things, I went back to my archives and looked at my trips to Ghana, to Tanzania. I'll bring up more pictures from South Africa. I've been sharing them in my feed this week as well. I've been featuring my other book, Joey and Grandpa Johnson's Day in Rondo. So I used this book to share some stories about the history of Rondo. So I put up a photo gallery about some of the key areas and things that touch my life as a native of Rondo. So I say this is your time to get creative. I don't know what the circumstances of the future will be, but I guarantee that you will be using more of technology. So now is your time to learn how to use it effectively and to learn how to use it in a way that aligns with your brand, your voice, and where you feel comfortable. So they can be pre-recorded, they can be live, but I would say maximize technology, because even if you're going back into the classroom, I would anticipate in many instances you may be using technology and visiting virtually. So now here's your time to practice.
I think that's incredibly helpful. And just like you said, this is the time to dive on in and start learning how to use these new and exciting tools to connect with audiences, of course, both locally and all across the world. And again, I know we're kind of coming to the end here, but just in closing, one question that did come through is, do you have any recommendations for those looking for more resources, activity guides, discussion questions for books and subjects like this? Do you have any kind of recommendations for websites or groups to look towards?
That's an excellent question. There are a number of resources online. For instance, I've been looking at the University of Minnesota Press. I love their website. It's very comprehensive. There are discussion guides. They have, excuse me, other videos of their authors. So I would look for examples and then start creating them. So one of the activities that we actually did, we kept getting questions on how can we create more learning tools around justice makes a difference. One of the things that we did is we created an activity book. So the activity book, I'll show you some of the physical pages, then profiles each of the leaders, and then we have activities surrounding them. Once again, use online and technology. We make these things available on our websites, on our social media channels, so that way you have some tools that people are connecting beyond just reading the book. Here's one note and one tip that you always want to remember as an author. People fall in love with the character. So people ask me, where's Justice traveling to next? What does Justice like to do in her spare time if she's not reading? If she doesn't become an attorney, what will she do? So thinking about all the different ways that you can engage your audience in falling in love with a character, that helps to build and bridge a relationship that transcends just the book. So actually, I'll turn here. Justice also came alive, because then I started to get all these calls and folks would say, well, I want my own Justice to have, to play with, hold in my hand. So lo and behold, we just released Justice in a plush doll. So you have the opportunity to also develop additional products and services based upon what your customers are asking you for. And why is this important? It's just a quick sidebar, because there's a whole movement in thinking about, I talked about diversity in books, but diversity in toys and other products. So it was a unique opportunity to make Justice come alive in an activity book, in a doll, in t-shirts, in other products. So you'll get to see what's in store for Justice next, but you can see people fell in love with Justice, and Justice is a part of their learning journey.
That sounds such great advice there to kind of expand your writing universe beyond your books and everything into other mediums and carry these lessons over. I think that's definitely really helpful insight for all of our attendees here today. And I just wanted to say again, Dr. Tyner, thank you so much for your time and sharing this presentation here. And thank you to all of our attendees for joining us. Everyone, like I said, will receive that follow-up email with Dr. Tyner's website as well to follow up on everything we learned here today, as well as, of course, the recording of this video as well. Dr. Tyner, do you have any parting words for our audience here today?
I just want to encourage you to keep writing, encourage you to keep building, and encourage you, more importantly, to continue to reimagine the world. And what does a just and inclusive society look like? We get a chance to build it. That's the beauty of leading social change.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much again. And thank you to everyone who joined us. And we'll be in touch soon. I hope everyone has a great rest of their afternoon.
Thank you.